That's a very good question. Let me take you back to the trust between Iran and the US. It didn't actually start in 1979. It has started in 1953 when the CIA and the MI6 overthrown Mohammed Mossadegh, the prime minister that was elected by the parliament. And it was a coup d'etat against someone who wanted to nationalize the Iranian oil. And the excuse that the CIA presented to the domestic front that Mossadegh is a pro-Soviet, therefore we need to act quickly. Afterward, they said they made a mistake. However, they did a coup d'etat on a democratically elected by the parliament, an Iranian prime minister. The Iranians did not forget that, because whenever the Americans are saying, we want democracy, we want the best of the Iranian people, and what they have done is the first moment the Iranians had a democratically elected prime minister, they just removed him and they imposed the Shah, and then after that the Savak, and everything the Savak did to the country. Now, on the American side, also the Americans did not forget in 1979 the 444 days of the American diplomats at the American embassy that were taking hostages, and that contributed to the removal of Jimmy Carter and bringing Ronald Reagan in place. So all these two issues, and then you have the Iran-Iraq war, that the Americans supported Iraq and the Gulf countries supported Iraq. So all that is embedded in the mentality of the Iranians, but also in the Americans, because the Americans' problem with Iran is that Iran doesn't want to submit. And this is when everything started, from the first beginning of the 1979 revolution. And they understood that Iran actually is not going to submit to the West. Worse than that, the Iranians gave the Israeli embassy to Yasser Arafat, who was received by Imam Khomeini, and was given the Israeli embassy that is today the Embassy of Palestine, in a street in Tehran that is called the Palestine Street, Philistine Street. Therefore, that move telling the Israelis, actually, the Palestinians can have a state, and they already have an embassy, when they were all surprised by what happened with the revolution, because the CIA gave wrong information, a wrong assessment about what are these religious income and the messages of Imam Khomeini that were listened by the population. That was really not taken on board, and they didn't see what was coming. By seeing the embassy removed, by seeing the objectives of Iran, the Constitution, Article 154, the support of the oppressed people around the world, including the Palestinian, the Lebanese, who asked from Iran the support 1982 with a delegation that went to Tehran and spoke to Imam Khomeini, who sent also Iranian to support the Lebanese to free their land. All that remains in the mentality of the Americans and the Iranians. And then you have the Marines, 1983, the barracks in Lebanon with the French barracks that were blown up, and the Americans accused the IRGC and Hezbollah to be working together for that. So these remains. I'm not going to go in detail into the Colonel Higgins that was also kidnapped in Beirut in the 1985-86 during that period, and the blow up of the US embassy in Lebanon. But then we have this animosity between the two countries. And
we had Iranian airplane being hit by the United States.
Yes, 265 passengers brought down, and the officers who brought it down received a medal for what he did. And George Bush, the father, said, I will never apologize. So these things and the non-submission of Iran to the American dictate in the Middle East, when the Shah of Iran was the policeman of the Gulf and the Middle East, That was a big shift. So now for the Iranians, if you take Sayyid Ali Khamenei, who did not want the JCPOA, but said to the government, to Sheikh Hassan Rouhani and Jawad Zarif, his foreign minister, if this is what you want and you assume your responsibility, go for it, but understand that the Americans are not trustworthy. Exactly his son today, the Wali Faqih, say Mushtaba Khamenei, who said the same to President Pezeshkian, the head of the National Security Council. You know my opinion, which is exactly like his father. He doesn't trust the Americans. But if you insist, assume your responsibility, but implement the interests of Iran. Why I'm saying that is because of the absence of the trust. The Iranians here, the vice president who came to negotiate with them and spoke about peace, saying, well, the only objective I have is to tap up the strategic reserves that normally are 700 million barrels, and we were left with 331 million barrels, and we need another around 400. He didn't go into these details, but I am, because we know what are the reserves. So the only objective is that, and then we return to war. For Iran, it doesn't really need to make any gymnastical effort in its brain to say, oh, that falls into the domestic talks, or that is for us, or that is for Europe, and that is for the rest of the world. There's no point in putting oneself in the head of the other and trying to classify every statement that falls into which category. The Americans are saying, we want the freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, and nobody appointed them as a policeman of the Strait of Hormuz. Secondly, they agreed, the president agreed and signed, he was not drugged. He signed on the MOU, paragraph 5, that Iran runs it for the next 60 days. And then he says, if Iran stops or do anything, I'm going to bomb Iran. So where is paragraph 1 that ends the war? There's no trust again. 3, Iran said the Americans promised to give $12 billion to the Iranians on the signature. Now they are talking about the initial $3 billion, and they want to tell Iran where to spend it and how to spend it and in which market. Everything is not really fitting, but the Iranians will never say, no, we're not interested. The Iranians will negotiate with you until you die, but it doesn't mean they would surrender. No, they will keep negotiating, and they will not agree and accept a final treaty unless it falls also in the interest of the Iranian national security. And what Vance said in the video that you put, and I've heard it and everybody heard it, it was a scandal because he's saying, well, actually, when we will fill our strategic reserves, we're going to go to war. Now, I don't believe he can achieve anything by going to war. He needs first to destroy Hezbollah, to destroy Iraq and all the resistance, destroy Yemen, and then come back to Iran. But even then, come back to Iran to do what? More than what they have done in the 40 days, and Israel before them in June 2025 for 12 days. They've done everything to the point that they have exhausted the bank of objectives, no more targets, and Donald Trump started to attack the civilian bridge, incomplete bridge that was not used by the military or the civilians, and then he threatened to bomb civilian locations and the Iranian oil and oil depot, which means there are no military objectives. And yet Iran continued to launch missiles on Israel when Israel attacked the suburb of Beirut. So what they know, they bombed. They went for 30,000 attacks on Iran. They bombed everything and they stopped because it's finished. It's over. The ruling system is still there. Iran is still in control. It has added the Strait of Hormuz. The pain is on everybody. The Gulf countries are suffering and paying the price because Iran, according to Article 3314, has a right to defend itself against every country that offers support to the aggressor, in this case, America. The Americans find out that all their bases been completely destroyed or severely damaged, as the Americans told us through their satellite image. So what they can do more than that? They're going to start saying, okay, well, instead of 12 billion, we give you 3, and then we want you to buy our soya beans, and then you buy this, and we want to control what you are going to do with your money. Iran's not going to accept that, but Iran's not going to reject it. It's going to say, well, we can buy something if it is a good price, give us a competitive price, and we buy a part of it because Iran wants its money back, not because that will make a difference. We all know that Said Ali Khamenei was sitting on $200 billion as the asset, including the continuous asset that keeps flowing from the Imam Riza shrine in Esfahan. So, sorry, in Mashhad.
Mashhad.
Yeah, in Mashhad. So all that existed before the war, during the sanctions, and Iran has the Caspian Sea open, has the railway to China available, open, has the communication and the commerce with Azerbaijan and Turkey completely open. So you cannot surround Iran that is making most of its product domestically. So this is the picture we have today. So for me, I don't think there's going to be war tomorrow, but I think Iran, after 60 days, is going to be very serious about the paragraph 1, paragraph 4, 5, 10, and 13, saying, where are my assets? Where is the withdrawal of the Israelis from Lebanon? Where are the payment of the damage? Because the GCC Secretary General said, we have no clue about the 300 billion that we need to pay to Iran. Nobody told us. This is what the Americans engaged to pay back to Iran and coordinate with the Arab countries so they can pay. Everybody heard Trump saying it, but the Arabs was not told officially by the Americans that this is what they have to deliver. So that's the situation today.
You mentioned instead of, before attacking Iran, they have to weaken or destroy the acts of resistance, all from Lebanon going to Iraq and then to Yemen. What is your understanding of what has happened recently in Iraq? Basically, the new government is trying to do some sort of operation undercover the corruption, going against the corruption. Is that related to what the United States is trying to do in the region?
In Iraq, there is a similarity with Lebanon. The Lebanese say we don't want the Iranians to intervene in our domestic affairs, and the Iraqis are saying we don't want the Iranians to intervene in our domestic affairs. However, in Lebanon, the president, Joseph Aoun, was appointed by the Americans and the Saudis. And in Iraq, the larger coalition selected Noor al-Maliki as a prime minister, and because they have the majority of the parliament. And Donald Trump said, no, I don't want him. I want Ali Zaidi. That is my man. And the Iraqis could not listen to Donald Trump, and they exactly did what he wanted for a simple reason. First, all the Iraqi oil revenue goes to the American Federal Bank. And Iraq's budget relies 90% on the oil. So you can imagine the moment they say no to Donald Trump, what can happen to Iraq with the million of civil servants to be paid every single month. They have to receive their salaries. So that will be another revolution inside Iraq because of the lack of money. So they really are caught by the neck, to say it nicely, by the Americans. So that is the dictate of the Americans. Now, the Americans have bombed Iraq during this war. The Israelis bombed Iraq several times. The Americans bombed the Iraqi security forces on the border with Syria, in Karbala, in Jurf al-Sakh, now it is Jurf al-Nasr, in Baghdad, in Salahuddin, in different places, saying that these are forces that are attacking us. And these are regular security, Iraqi security forces. And also, the Americans don't want to leave Iraq. So they have moved their bases into two places, into Erbil Airport and in Harir in Kurdistan in the north of Iraq. And for that, they don't want to leave. They think they are very close to Iran. This is a very important base where the Israelis can use during a war. This is what the Israelis did. And this is the base where the anti-Iranian Kurds can depart and attack Iran. In fact, Donald Trump told us that he armed the Kurds and he sent them weapons, but he was unhappy because he said they did not use it. That was what President Erdogan of Turkey positioned, saying, if the Kurds intervene, I'm going to move in, because Iran, Turkey, and Syria and Iraq, they don't want a state for Kurdistan in these four countries where it's an island for the Israelis and the Americans to exploit as they want. Some people may argue, but the Americans are present in all the Arab and Gulf states, but that will be the moment where the Kurds can enlarge their territory, take part of Syria, change all the borders, take part of Iraq, because in Iraq there is a Kurdistan, Iraq, take part of Iran, there is a Kurdistan, Iran in the northwest, and Turkey, it has several millions of Kurds that also they want independent. And also, as I mentioned, Syria, they want the Rojava. It's a dream of the Kurds. So this is why this did not happen. Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli prime minister, told us that he sent thousands of Starlink for the Iranian to use it in communication, so they can be guided during riots that they can start inside Iran. So because of all these reasons, we understand that the American objective is actually deprive Iran from all its allies and supporters. In Lebanon, they have Hezbollah engaged with a war against Israel. So Hezbollah is very busy there. In Syria, Syria surrendered, said to Israel, I'm no longer fighting. Israel is occupying part of Syria, and Syria is saying nothing, not even firing a bullet. In Iraq, this is where the Americans want the new prime minister appointed by Donald Trump gave an ultimatum until the 30th of September for all the Iraqi resistance to deliver their weapons. The Iraqi prime minister doesn't have a plan to remove the American occupation, not occupation because it's a government that is asking the remaining of the Americans, but in Iraq, there are still the Americans who are not supported by the majority of the population. And they have bases that the parliament asked in January 2020, when Donald Trump assassinated Abu Mahdi Mohammed and Brigadier General Qasem Soleimani, that the Americans should leave. This is why there is this clash between the opinion among the Iraqi, but no clashes among Iraqis themselves about the presence of the Americans and the disarmament of the Iraqi security forces and the resistance. Because the Americans are even asking the disarmament of al-Shaabi, that is a force under the command of the prime minister directly. They think al-Shaabi belongs in its loyalty to Iran, therefore should be completely dismantled. And the reason why al-Shaabi was created to fight ISIS is gone. There is no more ISIS, which is not true, because we see that they are carrying out at least 4 to 6 attacks per week in Syria and in Iraq. And Yemen, that last. Yemen, Iran said during the last war that the Strait of Hormuz will not be the only navigational passage that will be closed, but also the Bab el-Mandeb, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean. And by saying that, it means that Iran has other plans for the Bab el-Mandeb. And for that, we have seen in the last days a movement of the pro-Saudi groups and pro-Emirati groups towards Sana'a, preparing for a war to engage against Ansarullah, that until today there are still sanctions imposed on Yemen, and Yemen is not using Bab el-Mandeb as a leverage like Iran to lift the sanction. And I think after the Strait of Hormuz, I think Yemen will move next and will say, if you do not lift the sanctions, then I am going to do exactly the same. And this is what the Americans are afraid of. But the first objective now is to dismantle all the allies of Iran and isolate Iran completely.